He spent his first 7 years in the FBI investigating violent crime and major offenses, was a member of the FBI Omaha SWAT team for 5 years, was reassigned to domestic terrorism in October 2021, was indefinitely suspended as an FBI special agent following his whistleblower disclosures back in September 2022. He has a podcast called The American Radicals. Please welcome back to the program, Steve Friend. Steve, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Well, Happy New Year. I appreciate you having me today.
Steve, right before you came on, we talked about the terrorists in New Orleans. We hadn't yet talked about the man in Las Vegas, Matthew Leibelsberger. And Steve, apparently it was suicide. Apparently he might have even chosen a Cybertruck because he wanted to minimize the damage. He was getting divorced. His wife was leaving him, accusing him of having cheated on her. He was a pro-Trump guy, according to his uncle, although his ex-wife was an anti-Trump person. So the more I hear about it, the more I'm thinking these two incidents in New Orleans and Vegas are not connected, and the one in Las Vegas was more suicide than anything else. What's your take?
I agree with you. I actually have a little bit of inside knowledge. I had a little bit of advanced knowledge on that. My circle of friends were able to actually get and acquire the email that the individual from Las Vegas was trying to put out there, and it was pretty clear to me that it was the writings of someone who was going through some sort of emotional disturbance, and able to get it over to the FBI. And I think, to me, just looking at the facts and circumstances, knowing that he had advanced training, if he wanted to do some sort of attack with maximum collateral damage, he would not have used the gasoline and the fireworks. It looks to me, just from my training also as a local law enforcement officer, that it was going to be some sort of suicide. And unfortunately, all too often in many of these cases, particularly for men, they like to go out with this big, huge bang. And I think that that's probably consistent with what we saw there.
And he left some sort of manifesto or note saying this is not terrorism. This was a wake-up call. A wake-up call regarding what? That we're in too many wars? Did he feel guilty about having killed people? Did he have PTSD?
From my reading of what he was putting forth, it really was the ramblings of someone who was emotionally disturbed. He was seeing connections of things all too often with people who are going through some sort of schizophrenic episode or something that they will take happenings in the news and connect them to their own sort of delusions in their mind. So he was connecting anti-gravity, sort of like alien technology, with the drones that we were seeing at the end of 2024, and then just imbibing that information and put it sort of in this large scroll. And it wasn't really a political statement here. Unfortunately, it's just a sad reality that afflicts certain people at certain stages of their life. And, but for the grace of God, go I on that.
Tell me your take on Samsudin Jabbar, the New Orleans terrorist.
Well, this is just clear and evident sense of terrorist attack. We're fortunate to live in a country that's relatively safe. I think that what we're seeing now, as much as your heart just absolutely breaks for the individuals who perished and anyone else who was injured by that. I mean, if that happened to one of my children, you wouldn't have had me on tonight. I just kind of would have gone and disappeared. But to me, I think that the biggest threat right now is the American right falling into the same trap that it did on 9/12/2001, when we were put for a decision about freedom or security, and we chose security. And that was a zero-fail mission that we put on the shoulders of the FBI and the national security apparatus. And it turned around and hired a bunch of communists and DEI employees, and they used the levers of power at the government to go after what they deemed to be the true threat, because they were, after all, now the new arbiter of wrongthink. Mm-hmm. And they said the real threat is anyone who opposes the growth of the bureaucracy, the growth of the state. And we are at the bottom of that slippery slope now, and I am really fearful that we're going to restart that voyage all over again.
President Biden, as you know, Steve, says the number one threat to the homeland is white supremacy, and the number one threat to the planet is climate change.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the message of the communists, right? They just get a semblance of malcontents, which is how you can get people who are screaming from the river to the sea to cooperate with people who don't want to cut down the trees, and they want to cooperate with people who want to cut off their genitals. This has always been political messaging, and in the stats of that just are frankly laughable, and they're not accurate. Even if you to give them the maximum benefit of the doubt and say that the white supremacy violence and include prison violence, which is just kind of contrived in itself, that is nowhere close to the greatest threat statistically to the country. And they've manipulated that even further because they've called people who stood on the Capitol grounds on January 6, 2021, white supremacists. They've manipulated it entirely to turn half the country against the other half, believing that they are insurrectionists, hell-bent on bringing about some sort of form of government that is antithetical to the tradition of American small r Republican form of governance.
Steve, I'm concerned about a couple of big things. At least I think they're big. The last 4 years, 10, 12 million people in the country illegally, hundreds on the terror watch list, 2 million known gotaways, a million or two unknown gotaways, plus all these college students and others chanting pro-Hamas slogans. I'm frankly surprised, Steve, we don't have more things that happened on January 6th in New Orleans.
Yeah, I think that we're really lucky and fortunate that nothing to that effect has happened thus far to a great extent. I think we might even be underselling the threat as it pertains to the illegal alien invasion that we've seen over the last 4 years. I mean, in my conversations with gentleman J.J. Carroll, wrote the book Invasion, spent an entire career in border protection. He estimates that somewhere between 30 and 40 million illegal aliens who have come across the border. And that has nothing about the immigrants, I guess, or the refugee seekers who we've brought in from Afghanistan completely unvetted, and the folks from China who, even if they're on a student visa, they are all answerable to the Chinese Communist Party, and they could be activated as agents, even if it's under duress and some sort of coercion, because there could be threats to their family who's back home for them in China. We're at a tremendous exposure here, and the actual duty that the federal government's supposed to have to secure our borders is one of the chief driving factors behind that. It's going to be incumbent on the incoming Trump administration to take that up as its top priority, and it should, and it seems to be all indications that it's going to do that. There needs to be a tremendous effort to deport every single person who's come in illegally, particularly over the last 4 years, because we just don't know who they are, and there's no track record of them being anything other than willing to break our laws. About
a minute left in this segment, and we come back, I want to ask you whether or not we're prepared for things like drone attacks and other threats to our homeland. But what do you make of the fact that both these men were U.S. Army vets? They both served for a time at Fort Bragg. They both served for a time in Afghanistan. How deep is there a threat from people in the military becoming either murderers because of PTSD or radicalized because of Islam?
Well, I think that there's always a chance of that just in any sort of industry that exists. But the white whale, one of them for the FBI, is to try to pin extremism on our military members so they can say that they are radical white supremacists or far-right conservatives. And the FBI is also at this point now pushing people who it's entrapping in so many of these schemes to join the military. So I'm tremendously concerned. The most recent example was a gentleman by the name of Cole Bridges, who the FBI groomed for a couple of years, got him to join the Army, withheld that from the Army, and he was in service for over a year before they actually brought down the trap on him as an ISIS supporter.
We come back. A former FBI agent named Jonathan Gilliam says that the country isn't ready for what we could face, in part because of the FBI's DEI lowering standards. All that and more with Steve Friend. I'm Larry Elder. Steve, when Biden first commented, he did not say this was terrorism. FBI initially did not say it was terrorism. I mean, the man has an ISIS flag on the truck. What was the reluctance to say this is terrorism?
Well, unfortunately, we live in a time now where the FBI deems itself to be the arbiter of right think and wrong think, and that includes an actual list of predicated ideologies. So as much as I want to dunk on the DEI, Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Duncan, in New Orleans, the reason she was hesitant, and I'm sure Joe Biden in his 4.5 minutes of having cognitive ability a day, were hesitant to say that was, one, there's an intersectional element of it, and two, the FBI has this list, and unless you are on that list, unless your ideology meets the criteria of being wrong think, they can't actually investigate it as a terrorist case. I mean, anecdotally, I had this happen here in Florida. I mean, we had a police officer killed by a black supremacist, uses organization to flee authorities, leave the state, go to a place in rural Georgia that they were calling Wakanda. And we were told that's not a predicated ideology. You can't use national security apparatus to investigate it, even if there's a potential ongoing threat to future police officers. But if you flip the races around and it was a white supremacist, that would have qualified as racially motivated violent extremism, and we could have investigated it that way. So all of these bureaucratic hurdles are there, as well as the political ones.
Do you know former FBI agent Jonathan Gilliam?
I've had some interactions with him on shows like yours.
Yeah. He made the same argument that you made. He's left, and he said he just couldn't take it anymore. It's a very different bureau than it was back in 2005 when I was there.
I think that the culture has certainly shifted in the last, probably since the Trump administration, the first one, because the personnel was still being brought in under the same sort of vetting processes that were laid out during the Obama administration, but it was just the mask was revealed then. If you talk to even older agents, pre 9/11, when the national security focus really came to bear under the on the FBI, when it became supposedly the sentry on the wall to defend the homeland, the entire focus shifted. But culturally, particularly in the last 4 years under the Biden administration, where they're bringing in DEI and they're not even hiding their animosity towards huge swaths of the American people who they view as a threat to the agency, because those people are opposed to government growth. They're opposed to the weaponization and the politicization of our law enforcement. The FBI is the teeth on the attack dog of the Department of Justice under Merrick Garland, who is under Joe Biden, who is frankly controlled by a Democratic Party that is now communist at this point.
Did you hear that Joe Biden says he regrets having appointed Merrick Garland as AG, feels that Merrick Garland aggressively investigated Hunter Biden, but slow-walked the investigation of Donald Trump regarding January 6th?
Well, I think that he probably said that during the times that it was pudding time and watching Matlock time, because Merrick Garland ran cover for Joe Biden and withheld the audio of the special prosecutor's investigation of Joe Biden's mishandling of classified information when he put it in the back of his Corvette, because they didn't want the audio getting out there and people hearing him say to the special prosecutor that he was very excited about his Corvette because it made sounds like vroom vroom. Ultimately, the conclusion was that he was just a senile old man who couldn't stand trial. And that was in early 2024. And everybody seemed to forget about it until, of course, that was laid bare for us on June 27, 2024, when he had the debate against Donald Trump, and 16 million people saw for the first time ever that the commander-in-chief of the United States of America is basically a human Roomba.
About a year ago, the Department of Homeland Security, Steve, commissioned a study, the RAND Corporation, and the study concluded that America was not prepared for attacks on soft targets and crowded places. Since that report has come out, have we gotten any better? Are you any more confident?
I'm absolutely not confident in that at all, and particularly because you have a Department of Homeland Security which sets things up that makes us primed to become vulnerable. I mean, anybody who did traveling over the holiday season went through a TSA. That's a choke point. Anyone who has ill intent could walk into an airport, not be searched in any capacity because they haven't made it to TSA, walk into a crowd of thousands of people and detonate an incendiary device and kill untold and maim another large group of people. I mean, these are the sorts of infrastructures that have been set up systemically by our government, which then turns around in the Department of Homeland Security, who partners with the FBI. And in 2021, they jointly co-authored a strategic intelligence assessment that described what the true threat to the homeland was. And in their words, it was anti-government, anti-authority, violent extremists. And those are people who have a perception of government overreach or negligence. Again, the true threat, people who are opposed to the growth of government, who are small government conservatives, and the FBI and Homeland Security are willing to turn the entire apparatus against those people because they are opposing.
Steve, you can stick around. I'd like to ask you about Kash Patel, what you think will happen, and also want to ask you about these drones and whether we ought to be worried about those. You can stick around. Steve Friend, yes, FBI, thank you. Appreciate it.
SNC's primetime lineup is all new.
I've said this before, and it's worth repeating. You are not voting for Trump. You are voting for which team of 5,000 people better fit with your values.
2 hours of Larry Elder at 6, Charlie Kirk at 8, and Andrew Wilkow at 9.
The media does not know what to do with itself. They keep telling you that Bidenomics is working, and then they get upset when they see the polling doesn't reflect that.
We call it Big Time Prime Time on Salem News Channel.
9,000 kilograms of fentanyl seized last year, enough to kill the U.S. population many times over. Watch Fentanyl Death Incorporated on salemnow.com.
John, this to me, they're looking at all the wrong places and they're trying to ignore the obvious.
That's the way they've been doing that for a long, ever since I was in the Bureau, back in 2005, all the way back to there. When I got out in 2013, I couldn't take it anymore. I mean, the reality is they, just like down in New Orleans, a perfect example of what you saw down there is that the Bureau doesn't think outside the box. They don't want to think outside the investigative square. And so when you're dealing with unconventional warfare, you have to think unconventionally. They don't want to do that. When you add in the mix with that, the political left that has swarmed through all these agencies like a virus, what you get is people who are unrealistic. They are not qualified for the job, and they recruit other people that are not qualified for the job, and that's how you end up with this nonsense that you just talked about.
888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243. That was another former FBI agent named Jonathan Gilliam. My guest has written a book called True Blue, My Journey from Beat Cop to Suspended FBI Whistleblower. His podcast is The American Radicals on Rumble. His name is Steve Friend. Steve, what do you think Kash Patel will do?
Well, he's got his work cut out for him, but I think one of the first few things that he can do is eliminate the FBI's intelligence branch, because it should not be in the industry of secret police. You want them to be looking at crimes and investigating them, but not Americans for just their thoughts. Secondly, and just as importantly, the FBI needs to get rid of integrated program management, which IPM is the FBI's quota system that they determine every single year, and it sets metrics for them to achieve, like the number of arrests that they have to have, the number of cases that they have to open, the tools that they have to use, and it perversely incentivizes law enforcement and actually ends in senior executives getting $50,000 bonuses because their subordinates arrest the right number of people. I think there needs to be an overhaul of the way that personnel are brought in and they're vetted to be people of integrity who are capable investigators. There need to be a more emphasis on people who have a background in law enforcement rather than meeting some sort of arbitrary quota to make sure that you have the right number of DEI hires across the board, and the training that goes into that and bringing people up to speed to be in a premier law enforcement agency. It shouldn't be focusing, as it is right now, that white supremacy is the biggest threat for the agency to address writ large. They need to be getting the basics on doing interviews and collecting evidence, and then set out into the field to learn from police officers and experienced detectives so that the FBI can do what it's supposed to do, and that is assist the local partners, the agencies that know the crime that's afflicting their area, because the FBI right now just sits in cubicles all day and adopts those cases.
Steve, maybe it's because of what happened on January 1st, rather, in Las Vegas and in New Orleans. But have you noticed that the drone issue is no longer on the front pages? No one's even talking about that anymore?
You know, I had noticed that was going on really over the Christmas break. You know, there was that 2-week lapse where everything sort of shuts down and quiets down, and there were fewer reportings going on then. It was almost like they were government actors who were home for the holidays with their family. I think that the likeliest explanation for what's going on, and if you listen to the explanations we were getting from the DOD and the Pentagon, it was very lawyerly in the responses. There were actions about, they were asked about, are these threats? No, they're not threats. Is this the U.S. government? No, it's not the U.S. government. Well, that really left private contractors who were really in the employ of the American government, who are probably doing some sort of analysis, maybe even a stress test going on. And then there's also the remote possibility that it was artificial intelligence, maybe just that escaped from the lab, very much like the virus did in Wuhan a few years back, and the government was panicking. But the fact that it's dialed down now leads me to believe that it was man-controlled, and they were running some sort of stress test.
How concerned should we be, Steve, about drones?
This is I'm out of my depth technologically on it, but I think it's going to be the next iteration of potential threats for national security, just because they're going to be so commonplace. I mean, it's appropriate to bring that up here because today the FBI had a nationwide phone call with police chiefs around the country. And the big bulletin that they pushed out to the police chiefs was, be on the lookout for vehicles. Automobiles might be used in attacks. That's how behind the curve we are when we have aerial unmanned vehicles that are flying around, and a lot of them are going to do legitimate business. They might be doing deliveries. They might be just hobbyists. They might be doing some sort of surveillance. They might be doing some sort of an attack. And the fact that they're going to become regular, it's going to be after a while like not seeing the electrical wires because we just drive by them all the time. I think there is definitely a vulnerability there.
Now, I know nobody knows the answer to this specifically, but do you have any idea how many Mr. Jabbars there are in this country? How many people are in the country who would like to do something on the level of 9/11? Any number? Thousands? Have any idea?
I would put it in the six figures at the lowest level.
Wow.
Because I subscribe to the belief that J.J. Carroll has put out there that we're probably in the area between 30 and 50 million illegal aliens. And on top of the Afghanistan withdrawal, the unvetted parties that they came in through there, and then the visa programs, the student visas that we have, people who are from China and other bad actors that are allegedly here learning, but they're really just doing the deeds of the Communist Party of China. I am definitely fearful that if it's not in the six figures, it's in the high five figures. And unfortunately, we don't know. Because we don't really have an accurate figure of how many people have come in over the last 4 years.
Interested in your take on this. Regarding the 10, 12 million people who've been in the country intentionally under the Biden administration, in my opinion, Steve, Biden has won. Donald Trump's talking about getting rid of the worst of the worst of the worst, which is certainly understandable. But that means the other ones that have come in here illegally, walked across the border, southern or northern, cut the line, they're going to be home free. So it worked.
It absolutely did, which is why it really galled me to hear anybody who was Republican getting up there talking about how the Biden administration was failing on the border. They've succeeded. Their goal was just completely 180 degrees opposite of what you would expect from a government that was actually doing the will of the American people and their actual job that's written down for them in the Constitution to secure our borders. They opened it up. They flooded our country with millions of illegals, and now it's like a sales technique, right? It's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 1 step forward, and really they're going to wind up getting the lion's share of people in the country, and the media is going to support it. The sob stories are already written. People have to be prepared. Come January 20th, you're going to see nonstop flood of stories about grandmothers who have been in the country for 60 years, and they can't be separated from their grandchildren because they want to pull on the heartstrings of the American people. But the fact of the matter is, if we want to have a country here, we have to have a border, and we're going to have to deport all of them. And hopefully someone gets into the ear of Donald Trump and realizes it can't just be the worst of the worst, because his first duty is to the American people. It needs to be not America first. It needs to be America only.
We only have about 30 seconds left, Steve. Sometimes Donald Trump has said all of the ones who came in the country illegally need to go, but most of the time he doesn't say that. Most of the time he and Tom Homan talk about prioritizing, which again means that the bulk of the people that have come in the country in the last 4 years will remain here.
The most humane thing we can do is deport everyone, because as long as there is an incentive structure in place for them to come here, we're going to have 500,000 children being sex trafficked across our border. It's actually the most humane thing to do is to deport them all.
True Blue, my journey from beat cop to suspended FBI whistleblower. The podcast is called the American Radicals Podcast on Rumble. My guest has been Steve Friend. Steve, thank you very much for coming on. Appreciate it. God bless.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching these clips from The Larry Elder Show. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss a moment. More thought-provoking discussions are just a click away, so stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next one.